10 days ago, I embarked on Seabourn Pursuit, which is moored out in the bay behind me, on an adventure which I thought would be kind of unexpected and unusual to the Kimberley in Australia. It turned out to have many more twists and turns and falls, as you will discover. So join me as I take you to one of the most remote places in the world on a truly incredible experience and trip. I'm here in Darwin. Behind me is the city of Darwin. So I have just literally boarded Seabourn Pursuit. People are still boarding. Very easy because it's like a 200-something passenger ship. I'm going to go and explore my cabin, and then we will start exploring the Kimberley. Well, it's a good morning from King George River, which is the first stop here on Kimberley. So what's so interesting about the river is no one really realized there was a river there. So many people would call into the bay, and the entrance to the river is quite hidden, so no one ever kind of went in there until 1911. And it's about 10 nautical miles, it's about 7.5 kind of land miles in. And at the end is the tallest twin waterfalls in Australia. So we headed in. As we headed into the mouth, it was really interesting because we saw the first of the saltwater crocodiles, this massive sort of 5-6 meter male crocodile, which was just incredible to see. We then zoomed our way through. It was 2.5 hours altogether, and the beautiful red sandstone cliffs got higher and higher, from about 25 meters up to about 80 meters by the time we got to the actual waterfalls. Waterfalls were pretty spectacular. Being the dry season, they weren't like gushing. The Zodiacs, we went kind of close up to them, got a bit sprayed. Then there was a little surprise because around one of the corners they had one of the Zodiacs which had Prosecco and ginger ale and drinks and stuff. We did get to see some other wildlife. We did see some stingrays, some leopard stingrays. We saw this like little reptile which has apparently really vicious claws just by the waterfall. We were told, like, make sure it doesn't jump on you because it will basically rip you to shreds. We saw some turtles, but it was a really incredible experience. We're here at a place called Jar Island. So this is now the third day. Probably behind me there you can probably just see the Zodiacs heading out for the first of today's excursions. So I'm on Jar Island. Now Jar Island is just in part of a bay which is called Vansittart Bay. The reason that we've come to Jar Island is really it's very much around the rock paintings. So the Aboriginal population used song, stories and obviously rock art to keep the history alive and tell the whole story of culture. And there are actually two key types of art. So the reason we come to Jar Island is there's what's known as the Gion art, which dates back at least 25,000 years, probably even longer. And behind that there's a kind of a belief that they were created by a mythical bird. And the mythical bird was would peck away at the sandstone until its beak bled. Then with the blood, with its feathers, it would paint these characters. Now the characters almost look like aliens. So there was also belief, were they painted by aliens? Because actually there's a second type of art, which is called Wanja art, which is much more recent, but recent being like 6,000 years old, which is very different. And we'll see another place which is much more reminiscent of artwork you see today with the dots, etc. I'll explain more once we look at that artwork. They're also known as the Bradshaw art for a period of time, because in the late 1890s, a man called Bradshaw kind of really came across these and started to document them and the whole storytelling of them. And over time, it's realized that these are reflecting still kind of traditional dress that people wear today. Now, one of the interesting things when you come on land from the Zodiacs, because this was a wet landing, so we had to wear shoes that we didn't mind getting wet, but you have to get off the Zodiac pretty promptly and stay at least 5 meters away from the edge of the water because of the risk of saltwater crocodiles. So today's Friday, and it's now actually 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a beautiful sunny day, not crazy hot. It's about 26 degrees Celsius or so. And we are in a very remote part of the world, which is called Ashmore Reef, which you may or may not be able to see there behind me. So there's two key excursions you could do here. One of which was a Zodiac tour, which would take you to go around the sort of the reefs and the sort of island and take a look at the bird life. It's quite active from a bird perspective here. Or the other alternative, which is the one that I did, was to go out snorkeling. So the snorkeling was absolutely phenomenal. Beautiful reefs, very healthy looking reefs, loads of big fish, little fish, multicolored fish. Really was quite remarkable. Behind me you will hear the sound of a helicopter. We're actually at Hunter River, and I will shortly be taking you on a helicopter ride as we head up onto Mitchell Plain and the Mitchell Falls. I want to talk a little bit about falls. One of the things that when I'm traveling by myself, it's kind of difficult and challenging to get shots of me doing stuff. So that's why I have that 360 camera where I get those shots. But one of the expedition team yesterday offered to film me getting onto the Zodiacs. Now, I've been on Zodiacs gazillions of times, Galapagos, Antarctica, Arctic, and so on. But of course, the very one time that someone films me doing it, this is what happened. Here I am at Mitchell Falls. So we got off the ship, headed by Zodiac across to Naturalist Island. I always get confused between naturist and naturalist. Naturalist is the right one. As we arrived, 3 of the helicopters are arriving, bringing people back, and we were then allocated on helicopters. There was 4 people in a helicopter. We then flew here. It was about a 20-minute or so flight, incredibly scenic, up the Hunter River, then over sort of land, just stretching land for ages, till we got to the Mitchell Falls, which is just down there. So the helicopters land, and we then hiked to the falls. Now, it's a little bit rocky terrain, and in my usual bumbling self, I kind of slipped and grazed my legs a bit. Partly my fault, because I'm always holding kind of cameras and stuff, so that's a little lesson for me there. The falls themselves are magnificent, of course, being towards the end of the, sort of, I guess we're midway through the dry season now, so there's not a huge amount of water cascading over it, but still very beautiful falls. Now, the helicopter itself was really expensive. The excursion was $795 US. So I'm now hiking back, and I'm going to head around to over there, which is the top of the falls, and hopefully I'll have time to do that before I have to go back and meet with the helicopters. We've got about an hour here. Now, just behind me, you're about to see the mallard plane taking off. So it's very kind of noisy, but you'll see it just coming behind me and taking off over there. So I just went on one of the excursions on one of those mallards. So the mallards were, there were only 59 of them built, and they were built between the mid-1940s up to 1951. They obviously are, as you've just seen, they're boat planes, so they can land on water. They can also land on land. They have wheels that come down. So actually, the Powell Pasley Pearl Company, which operates here out of Kuri Bay and other pearling sites, they operate those to carry, I guess, the pearls, but also to take their workers to and from Darwin. So it takes about 2 hours and 45 minutes in those. I'm not sure I'd want to go in for 2 hours and 45 minutes. So we caught a Zodiac out to the boat plane, clambered on, so you have to be a little bit agile to get in. Obviously, they've been updated and modified since the 1940s, but does reek of aviation fuel, quite noisy, so you had to wear kind of earphones things. So we took off like that one just did a circuit around this area. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful. I mean, the most incredible colors, reefs. It was just magnificent. We could also see from the air the strings and the lines that they sort of grow and build the pearls on. So that was quite amazing to see. So the whole experience was just fantastic. It was pretty costly, $410, but it was just an incredible experience. So this afternoon, I'm then going to be heading off on the walking tour to discover a little bit more about the bay and also how the whole pearling thing works. I'll be able to explain that a little bit better. So I did head across and came on the walk, and it was much more interesting than I thought it would be in reality. But it was very interesting discovering just how important the pearl industry has been. Originally, way back in the 1800s, it was collecting the mother of pearl. So they were interested in the actual inside of the shell. Then when plastic came along and mother of pearl sort of went out of fashion, the company sort of flipped. They worked with a Japanese company to create cultured pearls, because the same thing that creates the mother of pearl, you can create a pearl. So what used to happen is if a bit of sand or something got on that the shells couldn't get rid of and the mussels couldn't get rid of, it would basically coat it and create a pearl. So what they now do is they send divers out and they collect all these shells off the seabed. Then they prise them open, they put a little bit of irritant in, I guess, and then the shells create the pearls. So it takes 2 years to do that. So what they do is they put them in these sort of like cage things. They kept it like 2 to 3 meters below the water. After 2 years, they were then brought out, opened up a little bit, and of course then only then to discover if they've got high quality pearls or not. Mother of pearl apparently is back in fashion, so they can sell those. They also sell the mussels. That was actually kind of interesting. Some very beautiful views. It was very hot because I was here at 1 o'clock, so it was a very hot kind of tour. Now time to head back to the ship. So I'm actually in a place called Talbot Bay, but more on that later, because I actually want to dial back and talk about yesterday, because yesterday we went to 2 different sites, and in the morning we went to one of the most famous and significant natural phenomena in the Kimberley. The other one, the second, we're actually doing today, so more on that later. So Montgomery Reef was originally named back in 1818. Now what's really significant about this is originally back millennia ago, it was basically mountains, and it covers an area of 400 square kilometers, about 269 square miles. So these were mountains originally, and over the millennia the sea levels rose to eventually it covers these mountains. What happened is coral started to kind of cover the mountains. So there's coral and kind of bacteria covered it. And so what happens is it has a massive tidal flow up to 10 meters. And so as the tide goes out, the top of these mountains gets exposed, and the lake forms at the top, and then all these waterfalls cascade down. And we just saw these fabulous little waterfalls up to 3-4 meters high. So it's great for the birds. The birds basically just plonk themselves at the top of these waterfalls because it's very easy to catch fish. Loads of turtles. We saw about 12 turtles swimming around there. I didn't get any pictures of them because they just pop up and disappear. So that was a bit frustrating not getting any pictures of them. But it is an incredible experience. Really interesting things. So for example, the coral, because it gets exposed when the tide goes out, it's created its own sort of SPF, its own sun protection, which is apparently very high SPF, to protect it from the heat and the sun. And so this like foamy stuff appears, which is kind of it being washed off. So that was an incredible experience. In the afternoon, we headed off to Freshwater Cove. The reason we went to visit Freshwater Cove is because it had the second type of rock paintings that I spoke about before. So this is the one Jira artwork. So we had the Gion at the other place. We had to go on a 30-minute, quite challenging climb across rocks and stuff to what was known as a family cave. And they appear to have sort of separate caves for men and women at various times. So in here we had representations of the art, and Neil, who was a local Aboriginal, explained the artwork. But we were told very specifically that we couldn't video, we couldn't take pictures, or we could eventually then, we were told we could take pictures of the paintings, but we were not allowed to post them on any sort of social media. So here we are in Talbot Bay, and just around about over there, probably you won't be able to see it, is the entrance to what's known as horizontal falls. This is one of the key reasons that people will book a Kimberley cruise, because it is such a hyped up, well-known attraction. However, it did actually disappoint many people, including people on my Zodiac, who pretty much complained about it, although I did think it was an amazing experience. So what exactly is the horizontal falls? Well, first of all, it's not a falls at all, which is probably where part of the problem is. So basically, it's what happens is there's massive tides, as you know, through the Kimberley, and here they can be up to 10 meters high. And so what happens is there's a sort of little inlet area, and there's a very narrow gap between sort of the more open ocean and the sort of catchment area. So what happens is water gets forced through this narrow channel into an area behind that, sort of a lagoon, I guess, if that's the right word for it, but it can't really go anywhere. So it kind of builds up, and then as the tide goes out, it takes a while for the water to get through, so it creates effectively this sort of angle, which can be up to 4 meters high as the water kind of comes out as the tide goes out. But it does create lots of, ripples and whirlpools and stuff. So it's not really a falls as such. And you don't really see a massive difference in the actual water level, depending on what time you go. So I did see the water a little bit higher the other side. A lot of people were kind of disappointed. They felt it should be more dramatic and we should come at different times or whatever. So, but I think it's probably a little case of the marketing is greater than the reality, but it was a pretty incredible experience. Now, up until 2022, pretty much everyone could go to the falls if they wanted to, but there was a terrible accident in May 2022. A little pleasure craft carrying 28 people went through, and with the really strong currents, it hit the wall, and they had to eventually deploy 6 flying doctors planes here. They eventually had to evacuate 18 people, many to Perth, with broken bones, head injuries, and so on. So pretty much only one group is allowed to go through the falls now, and you won't be able to see it. There's a little sort of, they call it a hotel, but there's a company that will go through with speedboats. But in 2026, from then onwards, no one's going to be allowed to go through the falls at all. So if you ever wanted to go through the falls, that's your only option up until 2026. So it was probably for many people underwhelming. Now there is another place that we're going to be going to this afternoon, and Zodiac's getting ready, which is called Cyclone Creek, which is also where during cyclones they move many of the barges and the pearl boats and stuff that I heard about in there. I'm just back from Cyclone Creek, and although it's not as dramatic going into it as it is with the horizontal falls, there's still a relatively small gap. So as we went through, there was a bit of sort of like rapid kind of stuff heading in. The reason we go and visit it on this trip is, first of all, it's convenient, but also it is very dramatic geology. So what looks like slats of the sandstone is actually sandstone that built up originally in layers, but as the continental drift has happened, it's been pushed up, so now it kind of looks like these slats. And then there's also so much of physically kind of a bent, so that's really interesting. And we also got a chance to go into the mangroves, certainly because the tide was rising, so we were able to get into the mangroves. It was pretty interesting, particularly if you're interested in geology. Was it the highlight? I'm not sure if it was a highlight, but it was pretty interesting. So here we are in a place called Nares Point, which is the last stop on our particular trip. So we moored out there in the bay. So this area is, we come here because of the incredible geology and these kind of twisted rocks, a little bit like we saw in the last few places. But also this is kind of sobering because we also saw where the landscape had pretty much been devastated through iron ore mining. So you just realize how humans can kind of ruin spaces. But we come to a little picnic on the beach here, not picnic, a little drinks stop at the beach here, and then we all be heading to Broome later this afternoon and the end of the trip.